Hi, and welcome to this three-part tutorial where we'll be looking at hip-hop tips and tricks. So I've built a demo track for this tutorial, which is all using the Shaolin Beatz sample pack, which you can get now from the Prime Beats website, so make sure you grab a copy of that because there's loads of great samples in there, drum sounds, break beats, various sampled instruments, all these types of things, so grab a copy if you can. This video is split up into three parts. The first video is going to be looking at groove tricks, by which I mean the drums and the bass. The second part will be looking at sample tricks, so taking samples of other instruments and sounds and making interesting textures and musical ideas with them. And the third video will be looking at arrangement tricks, so taking all of that and arranging it into a piece of music that actually makes sense. So make sure that you stick around for all three parts of this video. And before we get too stuck into the groove tricks, let's have a listen through the demo track that I've put together for the purpose of this tutorial.
Master, Sanjay is finished. We can attack the city. We cannot kill her yet.
She's a princess of the Golden City.
Sanjay is finished. We can attack the city. Cannot kill her yet.
She's a princess of the Golden City.
Your kung fu is pretty good.
Great. So when you're starting to build a track like this, probably the first thing you're going to want to get down is your core drum rhythm, because that's what most of the rest of the track is going to hang off. So I'm going to go right back to the first bar from when it drops, and I've laid out initially a very simple just kick and snare loop, like so. Now it's very important that you pick some really sort of punchy drum samples. These really need to just like carry out over the rest of your mix, so spend a little bit of time finding some really good ones that you know you're going to be satisfied with. And then try and lay them out in a pattern that loops really nicely, whether that be 1 bar, could be 2 bars, could be 4 bars, but however long your loop is, you need to make sure that it loops effortlessly and it doesn't get boring or irritating or feel uncomfortable when it does it or anything like that. So make sure you got that down, and that's going to propel the rest of your track forward really nicely. Now, hip hop drums need to have loads of character. They're a really central element. Now, I liked the weight and sort of low end power of this kick drum. Very sort of drum machine type kick drum, but I felt like it lacked a bit of sort of live feeling, a bit of organic sort of sound, especially compared to the snare here, which sounds very much like it's been taken off a breakbeat or a recording of a live drum kit. So I grabbed another kick drum, this one right here, which as you can hear sounds like it's also probably been chopped from a breakbeat. It's got an extra sort of hi-hat over the top, a bit of room sound, but it doesn't have that same kind of punchy, clean low end which we get out of the drum machine kick. So the best result will be a combination of the two of these, that when they're layered together you get, the best of both worlds. So that creates a nice kind of weight. Everything's got its own space. The kick and the snare feel like they're kind of maybe part of the same kit, which is perfect. As you can see, I actually pulled them from the same construction kit in the sample pack. Now, what I've then done is I've grabbed a hi-hat doing a very simple pattern, because currently our kick and snare pattern, even though there's a hi-hat layered over the kick drum, there's a few kind of holes in it. Like, for example, beat 3.5, which is right here. There's just a sort of gap there. And similarly again at 4.5 as well, there's a gap where there's nothing really going on and it just feels like it's kind of losing a bit of energy. So I've taken this hi-hat, which very simply has a louder hi-hat sample on the beat and a quieter one on the offbeat, so it goes something like this. Very simple, and then when I layer that over the top of everything else, it just kind of fills in those couple of little gaps that were killing our groove a little bit before. So now we've got a really solid beat, but there's probably going to be a few moments when you want to kind of switch that up a little bit, just temporarily maybe. So I found that when I got to the end of each 4 bars, I kind of wanted to have something a little bit different happen with the drums, just to kind of accentuate the 4-bar phrase, I suppose. So what I've done is I've added a breakbeat right at the end, sort of in the 4th bar of each loop. So let's just have a listen to that whole 4-bar section. So I haven't really done too much to this. I've just kind of pretty much dropped it over the top, swapped around a few little elements, but essentially it's pretty much as is. But a main sort of big thing to look out for when you're layering up drum sounds like this is the big snare in the break was happening at the same time as my main snare drum, which is actually one of the loudest sounds in my mix. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't stack too many really loud transients over the top of each other, and that's why I've chopped the break wherever there's a snare, so like here and here, and then I've just added in a fade just to take out the transient on the breakbeat, so hopefully we still get like the body of the snare hit in our break, but we don't get that initial snap that if it was stacked up on top of the snare drum here would just make it way too loud and cause us problems in the mix. So that kind of creates a nice bit of variation there. Now you've got the scope with hip hop to kind of swap your drum sounds up a bit more than you might do in a more electronic kind of dance floor genre. So after the first 8 bars, when it goes into the following section, I've actually swapped out my main snare, which was this red sample here, with a different snare, just to kind of vary up the mood a little bit. So let's give that a quick listen. Now that kind of changes the mood a little bit from here, which is great, kind of changes the tone. I've kept the kick the same because I want to keep that low end kind of consistency, and basically kept the pattern the same in the kick as well. There was a slightly different pattern in this snare loop, so I just sort of left that in there just for a nice bit of variation. And then on top of that, I've added an extra breakbeat over the top, this one here. Now, as you can see, I've done the same thing, fading my snares to make sure that it doesn't stack up over the top of my big snare here. But other than that, I haven't done anything too drastic to it really. Just sort of made sure that it lined up quite nicely, so you can see how I've got 2 kick drums at the start of each bar here. Now there's also 2 kick drums in the break here. So trying to make sure they sort of line up and they're doing similar sorts of things, but it's nice to leave it a little bit loose, get a bit of that swing on the go. That's what makes the drums feel really kind of convincing, I suppose. So the other thing to sort of look at is the bass. Now that's another important part of your groove, which is going to be pushing your whole track along. Now if I just going to move my bass group up a bit here so it's next to the drums. Now with hip hop, you want the bass to be very, very much tied into what your kick drum is doing. The kick drum's kind of setting up that groove, and then the bass is just really reinforcing that with some sub pressure. So don't overcomplicate it too much, and broadly speaking, you probably want to go with sounds that are pretty sub heavy but maybe don't have so much mid or high frequency kind of interest. So if I just take, let's say, these 2 bars here, we can just listen to these bass sounds that I've pulled out. So as you can hear, there's a couple of different sounds in there, like this top channel kind of sounds almost like a double bass or something like that. You can afford to be a little bit rough and imprecise with hip hop. It's not like it's dubstep or anything where you have to, really make sure you've got this sort of consistent bass sound. Like, just go for the overall mood. If it feels right, then it's good. Now, if I solo the kicks as well, you'll hear how the 2 sort of tie together. And that's really just important, is just don't overcomplicate. Just try and just back up the groove that your drums are doing. And I've sort of stuck with that ethos the whole way through the track, even though I've picked a few different bass sounds out. So let's listen to the bass and the drums together. And throughout the track I've just picked a few different bass loops that all kind of quite nicely just sort of bounce off the kick drums, but when I sort of switch the drums up or change the mood of the rest of the samples, I try and find a different sort of bass hit as well. But again, I've kind of stuck with something that's fairly kind of subby. So, like I said, don't overcomplicate, just try and make sure that you back your groove up, and you should be ready to go. So that's the end of this first part, where we were looking at groove tips and tricks for making hip hop. In the next part, I'm going to be looking more at the samples I've used throughout the track and how to do some interesting things with those. So make sure that you click through to the second part of this tutorial.